include slides and visuals or just talking?
Not at all, only talking. I want to talk to you. So my participation here is to talk with you.
Okay.
I hope we have fun. I don't have slides because everybody here wants to see your slides and what you have to say.
Right. And
Okay. So David, the organizers are telling me that we're going to begin in 5 minutes. First, Martin is going to begin with the information about the conference, and then I'm going to present you, and then you have the space. And yeah, that's going to be the main agenda of today.
And can you hear me?
Now I can hear you again, yeah.
Okay. So when we do questions at the end, people from the audience will ask questions, and you'll take a couple of them, and then you'll translate them?
I'm gonna translate them to you, exactly, yes. I'm gonna choose some of the questions we're gonna get, I guess, from the YouTube channel and also from the audience here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask a few questions to Martin, and I'm gonna come back to you, David.
Okay.
Ok, usted me dice, ¿estamos al aire? Tulio. Bien. Muchas gracias, buenos días.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Bienvenidos al tercer día.
Welcome to the third day
del Congreso Internacional de Educación para el Desarrollo
Sostenible. National Congress for Education and Sustainability.
¿Estamos escuchando la traducción en inglés? Sí. Ok. Bueno, les cuento que precioso día, amanecimos para los que vienen de más lejos, apareció el volcán, cosa que me tenía preocupado, ¿no? Se van a ir sin ver el volcán, no puede ser. Bien, qué bueno que apareció. Claro, devuélvanme ya. En fin, muy contento también por lo que ha pasado estos 2 días. Han habido muchos intercambios, estuve en varios de los paneles, presentaciones súper interesantes, investigaciones, experiencias. Cuidado con los micrófonos. Por favor, muteados los micrófonos para que no nos pase esta cuestión muy seguido. Vimos los talleres también, de ayer sobre todo, súper interesantes en la huerta. Acá, ahí pueden revisar después lo que pasó en este taller que organizó Glocal, súper bueno. Bien. Les cuento un poco lo que va a pasar hoy día, ¿ya? Vamos a tener... Sí, eso. Por favor, entren muteados porque cada vez que alguien ingresa sin silenciar el micrófono pasa esto del eco. Ya, entonces, tenemos lo que va a pasar hoy día. Hoy día tenemos paneles a las 10:45 y a las 12:45. A las 10:45 vamos a tener educación para la conservación, educación inter y biocultural, discusión sobre políticas públicas en temáticas relacionadas con educación para el desarrollo sustentable. 12:45 hay un panel online sobre interdisciplina y educación ambiental. Tenemos un panel sobre inclusión y convivencia, un panel también sobre educación en contexto mapuche y otro también sobre educación, cultura, pluralidades. También súper interesantes los temas, los invito a que participen. Y una información bien importante respecto de la tarde. En la tarde hoy día tenemos la salida de terreno. Hay algunos que ya están inscritos y eso es lo que se va a respetar la inscripción, ¿sí? Pero esto va a ser hasta las 2:20. A las 2:30 parten los buses, ¿ok? Si a las 2:20 alguien de la lista no se ha presentado, va a comenzar a correr la lista porque hay varios interesados que no pudieron quedar para la salida. Entonces estén puntuales a las 2:20 aquí en el hall esperando para la salida de los buses todos los que se hayan inscrito, ¿ok? ¿Se entendió? Se entendió. Vamos a tener la salida al Bosque Fungi en Huife y en Los Canelos, Camino Pedregoso, dos salidas de terreno muy interesantes. Pero además de eso, para quienes no puedan subir, vamos a tener también un taller llamado Project Learning Tree, que ha sido muy promovido por la Fundación Ibáñez Atkinson, uno de los patrocinadores de este encuentro. El taller de aeróbica para plantas, que está muy bueno, es un taller sobre experiencias artísticas y naturaleza, también súper recomendable. Y para quienes no alcanzaron a hacer el recorrido en el Miras, también va a haber un recorrido abierto que va a ser liderado ahí por Claudia Ríos. Eso es lo que se nos viene hoy día. ¿Ok? Otra cosa importante que les quería anunciar ahora es que para el cierre del evento vamos a tener también Glocal se ofreció para poder hacer un taller de citas rápidas. Ya, citas rápidas, es un taller que lo que trata de hacer es impulsar a que generemos contactos, nos conozcamos, intercambiemos, pensemos en qué podríamos hacer juntos. Va a estar buena la dinámica y esa dinámica va a cerrar con música por el grupo CAFOC, que es de aquí de la zona, una familia que nos va a interpretar su repertorio junto con un cóctel de salida y despedida, que espero que sea un buen gancho para que no se nos vaya desgranando el choclo, como se dice, ¿no? Sino que cerremos con el mismo énfasis, con la misma concurrencia que hemos visto en este y los días anteriores. Bueno, entonces, insistimos, entrar a la traducción con el micrófono apagado, súper importante, y ya sin más preámbulo, porque creo que no se me queda nada en el tintero, pasamos entonces a una presentación que veníamos esperando varios de hace tiempo, del profesor David Sobel, directamente desde California con nosotros, y para eso será Rukmini Becerra, profesora del Campus Villarrica, investigadora del CIR, del Centro de Estudios Interculturales Indígenas, que trabaja en temáticas específicamente relacionadas con educación intercultural basada en el lugar. Recientemente lanzaron un libro que se los recomiendo mucho sobre huerta y mapuzungún, que está buenísimo. Y nada, dejo a Rukmini para que nos presente a David y demos paso a esta tercera charla magistral del Congreso. Que disfruten hoy día también. Nos vemos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Martin, for your presentation. I'm gonna be talking mainly with David today, so I apologize in advance if I'm not looking at you, but I think you are gonna understand that. Okay, so I'm super happy and super honored to be here today and having this opportunity to talk with David Sobel. I've been reading his work in the last few years, last 10 years, Maybe I'm gonna wait 1 minute, so because a group of people or no, yeah. A group of people is coming inside the auditorium. And I get distracted, I'm sorry. ¿en serio? Okay. I think a group of students is coming in the auditorium, so I'm gonna wait just maybe 15 more seconds.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, I am super honored to be here today. I never thought of this. In fact, I've been reading David's work, David's books in the last 10 years. And I never imagined I would be here almost in person talking with David and also calling him David. You know, I've been calling him like Sobel et al., Sobel 2010, and now I get to call him David. So yeah, so that's why I'm super honored today. And I know you want to hear him, so David Sobel is an environmental educator. Also an author and international lecturer. He's a pioneer scholar working on childhood and nature, the connection of children with nature. Also pioneering work on place-based education. He has worked not only in universities, but in public schools, in British Columbia, in Boston, and he has written many books. I'm not gonna mention the name of his books because you can find that information on the internet, but I have many of those books, and so I invite you to to read his work as well after his presentation. David, thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge today. And I think now we're all ready to hear you.
Wonderful. Am I coming across well, Rukmini?
Perfect.
Okay.
Both your slide and your voice.
Good. So I like Rukmini's term super honored and super happy because that's how I feel to be talking to you today. I'm disappointed not to be there. My daughter spent a couple of different years living in Chile. One of those years she managed a restaurant and did theater in Santiago. And I visited her for a couple of weeks, and we spent time mostly in the Puerto Varas and Osorno area and did every outdoor adventure sport we could think of, and it was a wonderful time. So she has some roots and connections to Chile, and through her I feel very committed to the education system in Chile. I'm going to talk to you about place-based education and how it connects to education for sustainability this morning. I'm going to first talk about give you examples of place-based education, mostly actually in urban schools in the United States. And then I will move into talking about research on place-based education and its impact on children. I'm going to read this just so we're on the same page. Place-based education is the process of using the local community and environment as a starting point to teach concepts in all the different subject areas. Starting point is an important term because it doesn't stay local. It starts local and then opens up to more national and international content. So it emphasizes hands-on real-world learning, and this approach helps to increase students' academic achievement, helps students develop stronger ties to the community, enhances students' appreciation of the natural world, and creates a heightened commitment to serving as active contributing citizens. Here's a definition for education for sustainability. And for the most part, I'm going to use education for sustainability and place-based education as synonymous, as interchangeable. There are some differences, but I'm not going to focus on those today. I'm going to read this definition. Don't worry, I'm not going to read a lot of my slides. Education focused on creating a world that balances the needs of having a healthy environment, a sound economy, and an equitable society for the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I love this image of students in Boston with produce from a school grounds garden. So the big objective that I think we're all working towards is sustainable communities. So that's the top of this chart. And that place-based education, or education for sustainability, is one part of the larger sustainable communities movement. Sustainable communities are also trying to aspire to regional food systems, affordable housing, supporting locally owned businesses. So place-based education is the education piece of this larger endeavor. And part of place-based education is, or parts of it are, farm-based education, service learning, environmental education, partnerships with local organizations, other nonprofits, connection to local and regional history, a focus on schoolyard habitats. So place-based education is the big concept, and then all these things are part of that. And as I suggested before, what we're aspiring to is developing in students in an authentic environmental commitment and social agency. And by social agency, I mean the sense and the capacity to participate in shaping the worlds that they live in, so that they have power, a sense of power and authority to participate in making decisions. And if we want to accomplish that, we have to engage them in real places on a small, manageable scale over time. And what that means is that curriculum should follow development. So the child's world expands progressively from early childhood up through adolescence and into adulthood. And the significant world for children early on starts out as the home, and then the school, and then the neighborhood, and then the community, and then the watershed, and then the country. So as children's significant worlds expand, the curriculum should follow that expansion. A contradictory example would be studying the solar system in first grade. So in first grade, kids should be learning about home and school. In second and third grade, kids should be learning about the neighborhood, that kind of approach. Here's a different way to visualize that. This comes from a book I wrote called Map Making with Children. And so it shows that for 5 and 6-year-olds, the home and school is the significant world. For 7 and 8-year-olds, it's the neighborhood. For 9 and 10-year-olds, it becomes the community, the watershed, and then the nation, the region, and beyond. So I'm going to try and illustrate examples of this. And this was a quote from a superintendent from a school district in Maine in the United States. She said, place-based education is the basket. It's not an egg in the basket. So doing place-based education or education for sustainability is not some new thing like a new math curriculum that you insert into the schools. It's more the paradigm, the big idea for how schools should relate to community and the environment. So here are some examples. This is from a city called Malden, which is near Boston, a very highly diverse community. And instead of using the alphabet posters that in American classrooms, you buy alphabet posters that have conventional pictures on them. A is for apple, B is for boy, C is for carrot. Instead, this teacher did walking field trips in the neighborhood to go to places like the police station and the fire station and the electrical company and the subway station. And then each kid did a poster for that station to illustrate the beginning letter. So the P poster reads, P, my name is Patty. I am a police officer. I work at the police station and I like pizza. So I don't know if that all translates with P's into Spanish, but that was the way. And so these became the posters, the alphabet posters around the school. So around the classroom. So the posters, the alphabet posters are drawn from the nearby local community. Different project in the same school with first graders. There was a partnership between the zoo, which was about 10 minutes away from the school, and the school. And there was a zoo educator working with teachers to find projects at the zoo that connected to the school curriculum. So first grade students study birds. And so the zoo wanted a eagle nest that children could climb into next to the eagle enclosure. And so the first grade students participated in building a life-size eagle's nest so that when other children and their families visited the zoo, the children could climb inside it to see how big an eagle's nest actually is. So it was good curriculum for first graders and a benefit for the zoo. Different school in a different part of Boston, where the teachers were having children do studies of a meter square on the edge of a cemetery. Actually, the cemetery was right near the school, right across the street from the school. And the children one day found little white worms in the soil, and nobody knew what they were. So back in the classroom, they were looking through insect guides, and Rosa, the little girl in the center of the picture here, said, I found it. What does it say in the book? What does it say in the book? So she found the picture of these little worms that they had been finding in the soil. And it turns out that they were larvae for mealworm beetles. And so this led to the teachers creating a curriculum. Insects are also part of the first grade curriculum. So instead of doing some generic study of insects, they focused on the life cycle of the mealworm beetle. So they had found the larva of the beetle. And so this poster is, children's work exhibiting different stages in the life cycle of the mealworm beetle. Started from the kids' discovery outside. This is in a school that was in the Jamaica Plain part of Boston. The teachers would take students to the apple orchards that were about 10 miles outside of the cities. And while the children were at the apple orchards, they encountered the migrant farm workers. In the United States, in New England, a lot of the picking of apples is done by Jamaican migrant farm workers. So they come to the United States for the apple harvest and for other harvests, and then go back to Jamaica. The children got interested in who these folks were, where they lived, did they miss their families? And so the children wound up doing a study with the teachers on the issues for migrant farm workers. And then they wound up creating posters. In that lower picture, you can see posters. The posters were about the issues and the lives of migrant farm workers. These were posted in the local grocery store above where the apples were. So the shoppers got education about the issues that faced migrant farm workers. These first and second graders also did broader other studies of food in the urban environment. And these were posters that got turned into a calendar on how people could get free, healthy food in their neighborhoods. So in the upper, this poster up here in the upper left-hand corner is about building a soup kitchen. In the lower left-hand corner, it's a picture of a free food restaurant. So it's dealing with the real issues of economically challenged folks in the city and how to help support them. This is back in Malden, where second graders also do an insect curriculum. And there was an unused piece of city-owned land adjacent to the school. This is really just a tiny piece, a small part of a hectare. And the teachers and students together created a butterfly habitat on this little piece of land. And then students did research and writing, which is, so that's on these posters that were posted in this butterfly habitat. Those pictures and the writing about the different butterflies was done by the second graders. So again, good curriculum, and it contributes to the beautification of the urban environment. Here's just a taste of research. This is a comparison of children who had 2 years, kindergarten and first grade, experience of more of a place-based education approach versus children who had 2 years of kindergarten and first grade in a more traditional style. And the darker purple bars are the results of the children who had 2 years of a place-based education approach versus 2 years of a traditional approach. And these are test results on all different forms of writing skills. So you can see that the kids that had 2 years of place-based education outscored the other children. Makes sense. If your writing is about something in the real world that you're interacting with, your writing is going to get better. I'm not going to read this slide. This is a sculpture in Roxbury, which is a mostly African-American and Latino community in Boston. These are statues of the founders of Roxbury. And so I love the picture of the African-American boy in amongst the founders of the neighborhood. It just conveys what we're trying to accomplish with place-based education, a connection to the history of the community. This is another example in third grade, moving a little further away from the school, where there are tests conducted by the state of Massachusetts in language arts and math and science. And on the third grade tests, the local students, the students at this school were not able to answer the questions about bar graphs. Bar graphs is what this poster is here, showing the number of people that like to sled in this park or the number of kids that like to make snowmen. So the children couldn't interpret and answer questions about bar graphs. So the teachers did an activity of going to the local park, about 5-minute walk away, interviewing people that visited the park and asking them what they liked to do there. And then the students created bar graphs about their interview results. And so this was taking something that came from an assessment and designing an activity to help children perform better on the assessment. This is a wonderful book called No Student Left Indoors, and it's about creating field guides for your schoolyard. This is a great thing for older elementary students to do, is for teachers and students together to create field guides just of the things that they can find near the school. The plants, the trees, the birds. And so I worked with a teacher who did this with fourth grade students in Portland, Maine, and they created a field guide to the flora and fauna of the salt marsh, which was located just across the street from the school. Again, this school in Boston, where one of the school board members, one of the directors of the school, also was a radio producer. He worked at a radio station and produced a show called Consalsa. And so he worked with children to write radio programs and then actually do the production of a segment of his radio program on air. So it's wonderful to both use a local resource like this radio producer and to have children have a real public audience, so that the performance, their speaking and reading skills are put on the line, are challenged by having to do this for a real audience. This is a 7th grade project, more complicated. I'll try and do this simply. The Environmental Protection Agency in the state of Massachusetts determined that the city of Malden's stormwater, that's the water that runs off into urban drains, did not meet EPA guidelines. It means the stormwater was polluted. So the mayor's office had to come up with a stormwater remediation plan. And the mayor said to the school, this is the BB School, is a school for environmental and health sciences. the mayor said, can you help us do the public education piece of this required plan? So students learned about stormwater and how local citizens could improve the quality of stormwater. Things like picking up their pets' poop, not dumping motor oil in storm drains, not using fertilizer on their lawns prior to storm events. The students created brochures. The mayor's office reviewed all the different brochures, chose the best ones, and then the best brochures were mass produced and distributed with the water bills in the city. So students learned about a real local problem and helped to solve that problem through their classwork. This is from a school in Providence, Rhode Island, where the middle school students study different international communities, and they found that there was a Cambodian temple nearby the school. And the question came up is, why are there so many Cambodians living in Providence? And that became a whole study of the the history of Cambodia and why Cambodian refugees left Cambodia. And the students then wrote a brochure for the Cambodian temple that they could distribute to explain their Buddhist traditions. And here's a school a charter school in Portland, Oregon. It's very intentionally a place-based education school. I'm going to read the piece at the bottom that says, authentic place-based learning. Children learn best when participating in authentic hands-on learning experiences that are closely tied to the community. So in 7th and 8th grade, it's a course. In one of the courses the students take, they, again, similar to the Boston schools, they identify a local problem and then do some work to advocate for solving the problem. So in the upper left-hand corner, the students from the school advocated for raising poop scoop fines. So there was a fine for when you didn't scoop up your poop from your pet, but the students decided it wasn't high enough to actually discourage the behavior. So they advocated for raising the fine. And then another year, students identified the issue of secondhand smoke, excuse me, of secondhand smoke in public parks as an impact on their health. And so they advocated with the city council to ban smoking in public parks. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into one example. This is not an urban example. It comes from actually an island school off the coast of Maine in northern New England. And so the 6th grade curriculum in Maine focuses on understanding the ocean environment. And the big question that organized this study was, what are the causes of red tide? What are the effects of red tide? And is there red tide in our waters? You'll learn, if you aren't familiar with the red tide, you'll learn about red tide in a minute. So the students had to figure out what causes red tide. And they found out that it's caused by a certain phytoplankton that exists naturally in coastal waters. But when there's heavy rain and a lot of nutrients flowing into the bay, that encourages the population growth of these phytoplankton. And it tends to happen more when the water is warm in the summer. This is a problem that's getting exaggerated by warming of sea temperatures. This is just a graphic that shows ideal conditions for creating blooms of red tide versus not poor conditions for creating it. So the students, the teachers used watershed models so that students could understand how nutrients from agricultural areas flow into the bay in which their island is located. They started to learn this concept of bioaccumulation. So in shellfish like mussels and clams and oysters that filter the water, they can accumulate these phytoplankton in their tissues to a large extent. And when the phytoplanktons get accumulated in the tissues of the shellfish or in other marine animals, it can kill whales and finfish. It doesn't kill shellfish, but it does. But shellfish then contain a toxin that's comes from the red tide that can cause fairly serious poisoning. It's called paralytic shellfish poisoning in the United States. And so this is a news article about 4 people being hospitalized after collecting mussels that had actually been contaminated by red tide. So the students are, and the teacher the teacher gives the students the task of figuring out if there is red tide around in the waters around their island. So they are using the kind of test equipment that's provided by the Department of Natural Resources in Maine. They go to the town dock once a week for 6 weeks in the spring to collect water samples. They bring the samples back to the lab at the school and then examine them to see if there are the phytoplankton that cause red tide. They use a protocol from the Department of Marine Resources. So this is students doing real science. So their classroom science teacher was a volunteer for the Department of Marine Resources. So she had all the equipment provided by the department. So the children have to very carefully follow the protocol for collecting and examining samples. Here's a student using a phytoplankton identification chart and then looking at water samples through the microscope. And then the students have to report their data to the Department of Marine Resources, again, using the forms that all the scientists use to report this information. And then the Department of Marine Resources publishes on a daily and weekly basis places that are closed for the collection of mussels and clams and oysters because of the prevalence of red tide. Their school that we were talking about is this island right up here near Rockland, Maine, in Penobscot Bay. Okay, Got to change gears here. So starting about 20 years ago, we understood that it was important if we were advocating for a different approach to teaching based on place-based education and or education for sustainability, we needed to show that this was an effective technique for schools. So we started to look at three different things. What was the impact on student achievement, on test scores? I've shared a little bit of that data with you so far. On stewardship behavior. In other words, does doing this kind of curriculum in schools actually change students' behavior? And then on the question of environmental quality. Does doing this kind of work in schools actually make a difference in terms of measurements of environmental quality in the local environment? So I'm going to share some information about all three of these different areas. So this is from a study that's now fairly old, but still relevant on place-based education and academic achievement. So this is data from one of those schools in Boston that I was describing before. And I won't talk about all these charts, but let's take this one on the left, which focuses on life science scores in the test at the school that we were working with. So the school we were working with is called the BB school. It's the red line on the graph. The other lines on the graph are the whole school district of Malden. So BB is one school in Malden. So the yellow line are the district scores and the green line are the state scores. And so you see that what happens as implementation of a new place-based education approach is happening in this school. In the beginning, the scores basically track with the district and the state scores. But after about 3 or 4 years, and this is often the case, it takes 3 or 4 years for a change in teaching approach to show up in test scores. After 3 or 4 years, the BB test scores in life sciences start to exceed the district and the state scores. Here's another, for instance. This is in a sub-test on math testing scores. Again, BB is the school we're working with. The yellow line is the district scores. The green line are the state scores. So the BB scores start out below the district and the state, and then the BB scores gradually exceed the other schools. Excuse me for a second, I have to sneeze. The BB scores exceed the scores of the rest of the schools in the district and become equivalent with the state over the course of about 3 years. So this is documentation that this approach is making a difference in terms of test scores for students. Again, this is an older study, but I'm going to get to more recent studies later on. This was a study in the state of Washington, where the researcher compared 77 pairs of demographically similar schools. So these were schools where one school in the pair did comprehensive environmental education or place-based education, and one pair in the school, one of the schools in the pair did not. And they were similar demographically, meaning that they had similar socioeconomic status, similar teacher to student ratios, similar kinds of access to the outdoors. So in comparing these 77 schools that did do environmental education to 77 that did not, they used the Washington curriculum, the state tests. And their findings were that the schools with systematic environmental or place-based education showed higher test scores on standardized tests in math, reading, writing, and listening. The pattern of higher scores persisted for 5 years, and the schools that used the schools that were the environmental education schools were used natural areas more, had more professional development for teachers and more support from parents, community, and the administration. Here's a wonderful little school in a very poor part of Western Maryland. This is Western Maryland near the West Virginia border. This is old coal mining area. And this is a small school of 100 students with a very socioeconomically disadvantaged school population. During a summer science camp, the students found a little stream on the schoolyard that ran with orange water. And the student said, "Why is the water orange?" And this teacher decided to pursue this as a genuine question. It turns out that this stream ran through an area on the school grounds that was an old coal tailings dump. In other words, there had been a coal mine nearby. The waste material from coal mining was then dumped in this area adjacent to the school. When there's water runoff across coal tailings dump, it gets polluted. It has high contents of sulfuric acid. The teachers and the students at the school and the principal said, "Let's solve this problem." That led to this coal tailings dump being remediated and turned into an environmental education laboratory adjacent to the school. That was the beginning of this school being one of the few schools that took the little book that I wrote called Place-Based Education. This school took that book and said, "We're going to do this wholeheartedly." And they did, over the course of about 10 years, more and more of these locally oriented problem-solving projects. They also, in addition to, they built this environmental education laboratory area. They built a playground based on the history of the community. They started a farm where they had chickens, sheep, and goats on the school grounds. And so they started to have much of their science curriculum be based on the farm animals. So this is a little article about children asking the question of whether white eggs or brown eggs weigh more. Great math activity for second graders. So they had chickens that were laying both white eggs and brown eggs. Then in 2010, after about 7 or 8 years of place-based education, the students at this little elementary school in Western Maryland had the highest pass rate on the Maryland State School Assessment. Now, the state of Maryland includes a lot of very affluent suburbs and schools in the Washington, DC area and the Annapolis area. And so these children were being compared to children from very affluent school districts, and they were the highest performing school in the state, which is, again, another indicator that place-based education is effective at improving children's test scores. An example from Los Angeles, where there was a school that was adjacent to an Audubon Society preserve. They had help from the Audubon Society to help teachers do more of their science curriculum in the Audubon Preserve. Over 3 years, the fifth grade students went from 9% proficient on the science exam to 53% proficient. It's an organization called Real Gardens, Real School Gardens. At this point was working mostly in Texas, in the Fort Worth and Dallas elementary schools. They would install school gardens at schools and then do professional development with teachers to help them figure out how to use the school gardens to teach language and math and science. Here's another kind of large data set where the schools, the students in schools with school gardens is the blue line. The red line is students in schools without school gardens. And so you can see after I think it's about 5 years of implementation, gradually, eventually, the students in schools with school gardens start to perform better on the state assessments in science. Okay, so that's the end of this section on place-based education and academic achievement. Now I'm going to talk about place-based education and environmental stewardship. So do children's behaviors change when you do this kind of curriculum? And this is a page from a brochure that I will show you at the end, and I'll make copies available to Martine and Elisa and Rukmini to distribute to you if you'd like. So we worked with a coastal school in another different school in Maine, in Warren, Maine, where they were doing a lot of garden-based education in the classrooms. So you can see that they have growing systems in the classrooms where children would grow vegetables or mostly greens, and then they would get included in the school lunch program. And one of the educators said, it just felt like this is a salad culture, so that they basically they were changing the culture of the school so that kids were more interested in eating salad greens that they had grown. In this same school, we asked questions of the teachers to say, have you observed changes in stewardship behavior? And we did this over the course of 3 or 4 years. And so this graph shows the increasing amount of stewardship behavior over the course of about 4 years. There's a lot of research in the United States, and I think in other places, on the benefits of gardening for children. So some of the benefits are positive social and interpersonal skills, healthy eating and nutrition habits, also science achievement. Their attitudes towards learning is increased, and they have increased self-esteem. So it's changing their behaviors in terms of their own eating behaviors, and also increasing their disposition to be environmentally thoughtful. This is from a school district in Burlington, Vermont, which is actually a very urban school district that it's located in a refugee resettlement community where there's about 20 different languages in the school, a lot of a lot of Somali refugees in this town. And the teachers did a project where, or did projects of looking at the neighborhood and figuring out what the problems in the neighborhood were and then trying to solve them. One of the problems had to do with crosswalks on busy urban streets that children had to walk to school on, or signage about school districts. And so the students did presentations to the city council requesting better infrastructure for children walking to schools. And so one of the teachers said, after a bunch of these projects, our students are very comfortable with business owners, comfortable with the mayor, with the city council, and the neighborhood planning committee, because they've spoken there, and when they go to speak, people listen. So it's developing this social agency disposition that I mentioned in the beginning. For those of you familiar with American politics, Burlington is the city that Bernie Sanders was the mayor of early in his political career. And no picture here, but this is an interesting study where there was one teacher in a high school that used as his curriculum looking at the city's master plan and helping to implement the city's master plan. And he was one of 5 teachers teaching this upper level high school social studies course. When researchers looked at students who had been in his classes 30 years later, they found out that students that had been in these classes were much more likely to serve as to serve on volunteer groups in their communities, and they were twice as likely to have been officers in civic and service organizations. In other words, giving students the opportunity to work on a real local issue like master planning for the city actually gave them the disposition to be more socially involved later in their adult lives.
David, I think we have 4 more minutes, so we have some time for the questions. Okay, thank you.
So I'm gonna, I didn't realize I was there. I'm glad you interrupted me. I am going to skip to, this was going to be, I'm gonna do the 2-minute version of this. We did a study on the relationship between place-based education and environmental quality. We examined studies from around the country where students and teachers got involved in measuring the air quality in their schools. We found out that when these teachers took a place-based education approach to studying this issue, it was much more likely for the air quality in schools to improve. One example was measuring the air quality outside of schools at the end of school when the school buses sat in front of the school and they idled their engines. The air quality was lousy at those times. What came out of this was a policy that made it illegal for school buses to sit and idle their engines while they were waiting for students to show up. So that was what that was all about. And I'm going to skip this study, which is a much more recent study of, this is a study you should know about, a study of many studies that showed the relationship between nature-based learning and improvements in all the things that we've been talking about. Here's a couple of publications, and that article that I just mentioned that I can send today for distribution to you on the relationship between place-based education and student gains. This one on the benefits of place-based education. And the big idea is that when curriculum connects students to the real world, test scores improve, students become stewards of their natural and cultural resources, and students and citizens become active collaborators in community improvement. And that's the last slide.
Thank you so much, David, for your presentations. I personally, I particularly appreciate that you could show us example of all the grades. I believe sometimes in Chile, teachers or in general schools maybe have the feeling we have to choose between connecting the school, connecting classroom, connecting the content with nature or following the national curriculum. With you, we could see examples where we don't actually have to make that selection, choosing only one path, and in fact, with the connection with the place, with the nature, we can actually improve the test scores. And we have few questions, and also I have my own questions, but I'm gonna read these ones first. I'm gonna read two first and then two more. We have two questions connected with teachers and the staff, the school staff. So the first question is, what are the skills, beliefs, and knowledge that teachers need to have to implement a place-based education approach? And the second question is, what evidence or what kind of also, I know you share some of that too, but maybe what could be like the best information we could provide to principals, thank you. Principals in a school to convince them to work with a place-based approach.
There are a variety of interesting skills and beliefs and knowledge that teachers need to have. So here's what we've found over the years. First of all, they have to be disposed to wanting to be outside with students, and that means outside on the school grounds and outside in the community, right? Taking walking field trips to the fire station and that kind of thing. So what that requires is understanding that outdoors is not recess, and that when you go outdoors, it's a learning experience. And so you have to have very clear set of guidelines and rules and, you know, behavior expectations that so that children understand how you're going to behave outdoors. So it's often a mistake that teachers will try and do this without preparing students appropriately, without doing this in an incremental fashion. And the kids are misbehave and the teachers say, can't do it. So you have to be able to set up a different set of expectations for being outside. You also have to start to be aware of what the nearby local, if you're going to do nature-based stuff, you have to know the plants and animals around the school. You can learn that with your students, but it's really good to have that knowledge ahead of time. And in terms of upper grades and studying the history and social issues in a community, you have to start looking for what's a good problem that's appropriate for my kids to start to be engaged with. So at one of those schools that I mentioned in Providence, Rhode Island, the school directors realized, oh, if we want to do good place-based education, we need to do professional development for teachers on the history and the cultural history and the natural history of the city. Because a lot of teachers didn't know the variety of museums that you could utilize and didn't know the history of the community. So you have to become knowledgeable about the village or the town or the city, your neighborhood, in order to start to understand, oh, what can I use here? So some very specific skills are, teachers need to be comfortable getting dirty, right? They need to be willing to get down on their hands and knees, especially if you're working with young kids, right? And that was a problem for a lot of teachers we worked with. And so in a lot of cases, teachers started to understand that, oh, today I need to wear blue jeans because we're going to be outside and we're going to be doing a flower study. So I'm going to have to be down on the ground. Another skill that became obvious to us evidently was, I don't know what the term in Spanish is going to be, but teachers had to become comfortable with cold calling. Now, cold calling means you're making a telephone call or you're sending an email to somebody you don't know to ask for their help. So you want to do a project that has something to do with the local fire department. You have to feel comfortable stopping by the fire department or calling the fire department where you don't know anybody and saying, I want to do this with my kids. So that's another one of those. So the cold calling skill was something we didn't understand in the beginning, and it became obvious. In terms of the second question, that whole, what's the evidence to use? I'll send you these things that I mentioned. They're good, but they're in English. All the studies that have been done about how you facilitate change shows that the closer you can get the example of success to your existing school situation. So in other words, you're in a school, you want to implement place-based education. If you can find the example of a school that's really similar to yours, that's done this and has been successful, that's more likely to be persuasive to school principals or school directors. So, you want good examples from Chile of these kinds of implementations that then can be used in your school, because examples from the United States are mildly useful, but they're easy to say, yeah, well, that works there, but it can't happen here.
I absolutely agree with you with the information you shared about the skills and beliefs that teachers need to have. I would say, yes, knowing the land is a big priority for teachers to work with place-based education, and also flexibility. I didn't know the term of cold calling, but I absolutely agree. That's a very important skill for teachers. And related with the last comment you made related with examples outside the United States, we have a question about that. Do you know evidence? Do you know examples, research work in other countries outside the United States?
Work in Canada. I know that there's lots of very similar work in and research in the United Kingdom. There's a great similar kinds of projects going on in Ireland. I know a couple of my books have just been translated into Spanish for use in Spain, but I am less familiar with the implementation of place-based education there. I am about to do some professional development for teachers in the Czech Republic, where they are doing, where there are a lot of environmental organizations doing place-based education with schools, with partnerships with schools. There's lots of this going on in Australia and New Zealand. There's a really active forest schools movement in Korea. I'm searching in my head for examples I know from Spanish-speaking countries, and I do know that, yes, in Costa Rica, there are a number of schools, less public schools, more independent schools that are doing place-based education. So that's the extent of my international knowledge.
Like, yes, it's hard to find examples in Spanish-speaking countries working with place-based education. I would say that that approach is recent in Latin America and in Chile and in the neighborhood countries. We are just beginning to working closely with schools and land and place. I have my own question, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about place-based education and the benefits of this approach for minority children, diverse children, or economically disadvantaged children.
Yes. Yeah. So you notice that most of the examples that I gave were from urban schools. And so I have lots and lots of other examples of white kids in white communities, but I chose the set of examples I gave to show that this is particularly effective for disadvantaged students, socioeconomically challenged students, students of color. And in fact, you'll find more impact on test scores for lower performing students when you do this kind of hands-on education. So when it's practical and students understand the real world context of what they're doing, they become much more engaged in learning. There's one of the qualitative findings from a lot of the research we've done with this whole movement towards 1 day a week in the woods, which is happening in a lot of schools in the United States, especially in New England, is that teachers and administrators say the students that are behavior problems in the classroom are not behavior problems when they're outdoors. And in fact, the students that are the low performing students in the classroom often become the leaders in the outdoor setting. So this is probably, it's important to advocate for this approach as one solution to closing the achievement gap in school performance. This helps low performing students more than high performing students.
what you shared. And I think maybe we have time for 2 more questions. And one of the questions is related with teacher education. If you could share with us maybe information you have about universities, teacher education programs working with place-based education approach. Yeah, well, examples, I don't know. Yes.
Yeah. So even in the United States, there are a small number of higher education teacher preparation programs. More and more, but still a small number. So at the university where I am, where I taught for 40 years, Antioch University, New England, has a place-based education program that is mostly virtual. So it's one of those programs that you could from Chile, you could participate in this if your English was reasonably good. I worked with teacher educators at the University of Michigan in Flint, Michigan, and they were trying to convert their whole teacher education program towards being more place-based. There are some small liberal arts colleges in the United States, like the College of the Atlantic in Maine, and Unity College in Maine that have this approach. I know there's an example that I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, the University of Vermont has just implemented a graduate program in both undergraduate and graduate courses in place-based education in Vermont. And there's an organization in that same area near Burlington, Vermont, called Shelburne Farms. And they conduct really good education for sustainability summer institutes for teachers. So that's a beautiful location, and so if Chilean teachers could afford it, these week-long summer institutes that they do are really excellent.
Thank you so much, and David. We have now a lot of information, places, and universities to look for example as well. I forgot to ask the audience here if somebody have a question in a piece of paper, but we're not gonna share them because of time. So I'm not sure if somebody here have a question in a piece of paper, written down. Nobody have a question written. Nadie escribió una pregunta y le quiera que yo la lea, que la tenga escrita en un papelito. So one of the questions I got, but I think is hard to answer. So I'm gonna see what can we do. What can I do to translate, and what can we do together to answer the question? The question is about here the problem in Villarrica we have with the big and bad contamination of the lake, of the Villarrica lake.
Wait a second. What kind of contamination?
The lake.
No, but what's the pollutant? Is there one?
Like, no, I don't know, everything you can imagine, the water.
Okay. Yep.
Bloom, algas, okay.
Algae bloom. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yep. Okay.
But it's only that. Is that the problem? Yeah. Yeah. People saying here a lot of words I don't know how to say in English because those are very specific, like I don't know. I don't even like natural science words. But like, you know, like a person here just living in Villarrica, I would say like the kind of contamination is the kind of contamination that you are scared of going with your kids to the lake and swim in the lake and spend time with children in the lake. So going with your students and with your classroom to the lake and play with the water is not recommended, and it doesn't feel safe. So one of the questions have to do with that. What kind of recommendations you could share with us to work with the school, with children with that problem?
Right, right. Well, I would presume that if this is a middle school or a high school question, that the teachers could collect lake water for testing back in the classroom, right? And therefore, and then you could also be testing water that's tap water that's clean, so that it would be great for students to be able to go and collect the samples, but it would be second best to have teachers collect the samples from the lake. Teachers could take pictures of where they were collecting the samples to give it context. And then doing the water sample testing in the classroom. Now, it's a recurrent finding from lots of different projects is that when students report problems of environmental pollution or environmental quality, the fact that students are reporting these results often is newsworthy and so it winds up in local media, and then it often engenders action by the local authorities. So there are a number of examples where students' involvement in presenting a problem has led to greater interest in solving the problem.
We're gonna have the last question. I know we are past time, but I really like this question. In many of the studies you shared, it takes some time, maybe a year, maybe more, to see the results of this approach, especially if we are thinking of the academic results, the test scores. How do you keep faith in this type of projects? How do we keep going, and if we're gonna see the results, the outcomes, maybe years later?
Right. Yeah, this is a tough issue. It does take 3 years for test scores to start to change, and that's in large part a function of the fact that the implementation of the change is spotty in the beginning, and it's only when the implementation becomes comprehensive that it starts to make a difference. One thing to do is to look for is to try and measure precursors to the academic test scores. So for instance, a precursor is measuring student engagement. So we know from lots of studies that when there's more student engagement, then there's more likelihood for better academic performance. So you can start to do surveys of how do students like their science class indoors versus how do they like their science class when it's outdoors on the playground. And so just the students, if students are saying, yes, we liked it more when we were outdoors, I could focus better, it helped me learn better. If students are saying that, that's a precursor indicator that things are working, and that data you can get really quickly.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and thank you for that advice. So I think thank you and everybody for this session, for this presentation today, and I hope everybody keep enjoying the conference all day. Thank you, David.
Thanks for
Rukmini, should I email those things that I mentioned to you? Should I
send them to
you or Elisa or who? Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Are you gonna say something to David, or should I just somebody there here? Okay. Some of the organizer is gonna take care of the computer.